Open my parachute and live, or don't open my parachute and die. And I've never in my life felt that level of freedom.
Hi, I'm Carole Podell, and this is She Takes the Lead. Hi, party people. It's Carole. I hope you're having a fabulous day today. I am very excited today because we have a very cool guest. Before I introduce him, though, I want to explain a little about how this came. Today, we're going to talk about neurodiversity, all things ADHD, and dyslexia, entrepreneurship, and a host of other topics. Before we start, personally, this is a very important subject to me because I am neurodiverse. When I was in the third grade, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. At the time, which was in the 70s, this was very new for people to be diagnosed with this kind of thing. You really didn't know much about it. The people who were working on it were sort of considered cutting edge around what they were studying and trying to solve for. Also, the term neurodiverse was not a thing. ADHD itself didn't even become a diagnosis until the 80s. And it didn't really come out. And actually, I think it was ADD at the time, which was just attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity, to my knowledge of anything until the 90s. So if that gives you any context, I know that seems like a long time in 2024, but it's not really that long when you start thinking about what people have done with their lives, with the world, with inventions, technology, medicine, et cetera, et cetera. So, and more people are neurodiverse. There's an estimated 15 to 20% of the world's population is considered neurodiverse, which means that basically 1 in 5 people have a brain that functions differently from the quote unquote majority, right? And neurodiversity is a broad term. It includes autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, calculia, Tourette's. So that umbrella term, basically oversimplifying it, describes people who perceive and interact with the world differently than what is quote unquote neurotypical to the majority. So I'm dyslexic. I found out in the third grade when I was having huge amounts of difficulty learning to read when I was a kid. My mother, who is very smart and very, very well educated. I can remember when I was a kid, she literally had like 3 books going at the same time with little tabs. She would like mark them and like put little colorful tabs marking thoughts and ideas. And I always thought it was kind of an incredible thing that she could do. Like she could read all of that at the same time, retain it to the point where she wanted to mark things that she remembered. Like this was a big deal for me. That was sort of normal in my house. And my father, who although found out when I found out I was dyslexic, found out he was also dyslexic because it's hereditary. By that time, you know, he was very successful in his own career. He's also very, very smart, but he definitely learns differently and thinks differently than my mother, who thinks definitely more, although she is very creative, thinks more linear in terms of, I guess we would call it classically. And both my parents were very, very active in wanting to make sure I could get the best education I could and that I could learn as much as I could. And my mother especially was hugely devoted to trying to make sure that I was, you know, leveled up on the playing field with those who did not have these issues. So she really championed me. She really like pushed through a lot. I mean, especially at the time, you know, she didn't know about this. Nobody really knew about this. And she really was instrumental in me getting the education that I got. And I got a very good education, although I really didn't understand how I thought until I was probably in late college and early 20s when I was finally allowed to read what I wanted to read. And that helped tremendously. And I read a lot to this day. I mean, less so now because I have a 5-year-old. So I'm reading warnings on labels now, but we do our best with what we have. So as someone who has been raised knowing they're dyslexic, when ADHD, at the time ADD, came out as a diagnosis in the 90s, I didn't really buy it. Yikes. I know that's so not cool to say. It's not that I didn't buy the diagnosis. But what I found to be happening that I found hugely frustrated and frankly offensive, given my own experience and struggles with just basic learning how to read, was that so many people that I knew or came across were self-diagnosing themselves as ADD. And what I perceived was that they, as soon as they decided or realized that they were ADD, they leaned into it and basically said, well, I can't really focus, so I'm not going to try. And I spent after school and weekends, literally until I was in high school, with tutors and trying to get extra time and trying to like keep up with what everybody else was doing in school. So watching people kind of lean into it could not have been more frustrating. So now, almost 30 years later, and I obviously have a podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of the women that I listen to, Jenna Kutcher, who I adore, she was diagnosed with ADHD, and she talks about it on her podcast. And as she started talking about it more and more, and as I started listening differently, and that's the truth, I started thinking that perhaps I had it. Everything that is neurodiverse, I always consistently contributed to dyslexia. And also in women, that is late diagnosed ADHD because of perimenopause. Your hormones change, your body chemistry changes tremendously, and your brain changes, your neurosynapse change. Similarly, when you have a baby, they change. If you actually, I have talked to psychiatrists about this, your synapse do change and rewire once you've had a kid. So hormones take a tremendous piece of this for late diagnosed women with ADHD, one of whom is me. So ADHD was roaming around in my reality, and I started realizing that a lot of the things that I attributed to my dyslexia were very similar to what I was hearing about with ADHD. So, I'm a big fan of therapy. I have a therapist. I love my therapist. And I went into my therapist and I said, this is going to sound crazy, but I have to ask, do you think that I have ADHD? And without skipping a beat, she said she did. She said yes. So I went there, which is what we do, which is why we have this podcast, right? This is why we talk about this stuff. This is why it's so important for me personally that we get all this stuff out in the open and we don't hide it, because we really are as sick as our secrets. And the more secretive we are with these things, the more alone and in a vacuum we feel, and the less empowered we feel to be able to take hold of it and use it to our advantage, or at least just know it, acknowledge it, and understand more about ourselves rather than hiding something and feeling ashamed of it. Shame is just not something I'm interested in experiencing anymore, ever again. That leads me to my guest. When I started my podcast, I knew I wanted to interview this next guest. He's super interesting. He's super accomplished. He's very his own man. And I think he embraced that very early on, which is always kind of impressive in my opinion, because, it takes time to say, I'm good with me. I'm going to officially introduce him now. Peter Shankman is a top keynote speaker in marketing, social media, customer service, and neurodiversity in the workplace. The Times called Peter a rock star who knows everything about social media and then some. He's a 6-time best-selling author and entrepreneur, as well as virtual and in-person corporate keynote speaker, focusing on neurodiversity in the workplace and customer experience. With 3 startup launches and exits in his vast bag of tricks, Peter is recognized worldwide for radically new ways of thinking about the customer experience, social media, PR, marketing, advertising, ADHD, and the new neurodiverse economy. He's the host of the #1 podcast on ADHD called Faster Than Normal, showing thousands of people around the world the superpowers and gifts of having a faster than normal brain. He founded HARO, aka Help a Reporter Out, which became the standard for thousands of journalists looking for sources. So HARO was acquired a few years ago, and for a brief moment was called Hero, and now has become officially SOS, Source of Sources, which I'll let him talk more about. And he has written his latest book, The Boy with the Faster Brain, which is his new best-selling children's book, showing kids around the world that having a different brain, whether it be ADHD, ADD, EFD, which is executive function disorder, or anything neurodiverse, is the best thing that they could hope for. Last but not least, Peter is a 2-time Ironman triathlete, a Class B licensed skydiver, and most importantly, a very devoted dad to a wonderful daughter and a rescue pup named Waffle. So without further ado, I give you Peter Shankman. Welcome, Peter.
Good to be here, Carole.
I am totally excited that you're on today. I'm going to just jump right to it. I wanted to start out. What exactly is your quote unquote diagnosis?
So I have ADHD. Some would argue massive ADHD, but I have ADHD. I have never been diagnosed autistic, although personally, looking back on my life, it would not surprise me. What I can tell you definitely is ADHD.
Did you mention that you were dyslexic?
I am dyslexic. I've kind of quote unquote beaten that. So I don't really consider that to be a big issue anymore. Growing up, it was brutal, especially because it was numerically dyslexic. So most of my reading, I was reading at college level from like third grade, but math, I was destroyed. And as you know, in the New York City public schools, you couldn't get any assistance if you were good in one and not good in the other. You had to be bad at both. And so it was tough.
I'm dyslexic, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I have found out that I am also ADHD.
I mean, it definitely presents different in women than it does in men, no question about it.
That's what I heard, that the hyperactivity part often is more in men. So how did you find out?
So I always knew I was different. I just assumed, remember, I grew up in New York City, and specifically until high school, I was in Staten Island. And if Staten Island ever seceded and became its own state, it would have its own license plate, and which would mean it would have its own motto on the license plate. And in Staten Island, that motto would read Staten Island, where if you're different, that's wrong. So I grew up in elementary school and junior high being told on a regular basis that I was broken, that I didn't know how to learn, that I was just not a good student. I should sit there. I had teachers say, why don't you just sit in the back and try to sleep?
Wow.
It was not a good experience at all. High school was a little better because, as you know, I went to a high school, as did you, where everyone was a fuck up and everyone was weird in their own way. And that was awesome because all of a sudden my weirdness didn't entirely define me as a negative. It went from 100% negative to maybe about 85% negative. So I was able to shine a little bit and find things that I actually was good at. And when I found things I was good at, all of a sudden I came into this realization that, wow, if I like to do something, I do it really, really, really well. I don't do math really well. I don't like math, but it turns out I can run the stage crew with my eyes closed, kill it, And that was really the first time I realized that my brain was a little different and could actually work a little differently and maybe to my benefit. But the problem was also growing up, being told I was broken, the social norms that most kids get by the time they enter high school, I just didn't have. I had the social acuity of a turnip until around my mid-20s. And it was tough. Looking back on it, it was really, really difficult because I just never knew when to shut up. I never knew when to keep quiet. I never knew when to say the right thing, say the wrong thing. And so it was tough. It was really difficult. And looking back on it now, that you can trace every single thing back to the chemical reaction or the lack of chemical reaction that happens because of ADHD. I would crack jokes in class, and the whole class would laugh, and I'd get sent to the principal's office. And looking back on it, why was I cracking jokes? Because when you're normal, when you're neurotypical, and you're sitting in a class you don't love, like math or whatever, your brain says, okay, I know you don't love this, but you need to focus. So here's some dopamine, here's some serotonin, here's some adrenaline. That'll let you focus. When you're ADHD, you don't have that. You're missing about 25% of the monoamine inhibitor reactions that allow you to create those chemicals in your brain. So to get those back, your brain looks for anything it can do in the situation given where it can create those chemicals. I couldn't jump up and stand up to the back of the room and do jumping jacks. That wasn't a thing back then. So I'd sit in the class and I'd be bored as hell and I'd make a joke. And when I made the joke, all of a sudden I had this electricity that shot through me and I could focus. Unfortunately, I rarely got the time to because I was usually sent out of the room for causing a disruption. That's what we're realizing today. And that's what teachers are starting to learn, and parents are learning. There's more than one way to learn. The whole reason that classrooms are built with a teacher in the front and rows of students, one after the other, is from over 200 years ago with one-room schoolhouses, because that was the only way you could fit as many people as possible in the classrooms, many children. I was speaking at a school in Jersey a couple of weeks ago about my kids' book, and the kids don't have assigned seats. They sit on the floor, and they have mats and rugs and beanbags and whatever, and they can sit in any way that makes them comfortable. And they have a hallway, a sensory touch hallway, where they can walk and they can jump and they can run anytime they need to. to give them that focus. That's the kind of stuff we're starting to see, and it needs to grow tremendously. So not having that, it was very, very tough for me. And so when I was in my, I guess, early 30s, probably late 20s, early 30s, probably early 30s, mid 30s, I was seeing a psychologist, and we were talking about something, and he said, "I'm asking a new topic. When were you diagnosed with ADHD?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I was never diagnosed with ADHD." He's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't have ADHD." And he goes, "Really?"
Wow.
I mean, he literally picked up the book. I think it was Delivered from Distraction by Ned Hallowell, and threw it at me. Like, literally tossed me a book. And he said, "Read this. There's a test in the first 3 pages. Read it. If you get over 24 out of 100, you probably have ADHD." I got 97.
Wow.
That's interesting. But the thing about being diagnosed, all it did was it gave me a name to what I had already figured out, right? And it allowed me to start thinking, hey, maybe all the things I do that everyone says are weird are actually beneficial. Maybe they're the reason for my success. Maybe the reason I became a licensed skydiver. I started to realize, wow, it's funny. I bring my laptop to the drop zone. I do a jump. I land. I take my gear off. I sit in the corner of the hangar and I bang out 10,000 words in a half hour because I'm so incredibly focused. I wonder. I thought it was the fresh air upstate. No, it's the fact that I'm dead full of dopamine, serotonin, and adrenaline from that skydive. Once I started realizing that, I was able to, over the next 10, 15 years, create a life for myself that allows me to best get those chemicals, to best utilize those chemicals the way I need to, when I need to. And, the joke there is that two things allowed me to sort of be successful and be sort of, quote, the best I could be. One was realizing, okay, you have to create a certain life for yourself that other people might find weird. And the other thing was finally getting to the point where 99% of the time now, I don't give a fuck what other people think. That took forever. And it's still not perfect. But I have certain rules in my life, and these rules have to be followed, or I go to shit, or I have a shit day, or whatever. I sleep in a pair of bike shorts and socks. And when I wake up, I don't even have to open my eyes, and I slide onto my Peloton, which is 3 feet from my bed, and I work out for an hour. And sometimes I won't even open my eyes for the first 10 minutes of the ride, but I'm doing it. And I get off the bike an hour later, and I've just given myself the chemicals I need to have a better day. When my daughter, who's now 11, was about 4 or 5, I slept in one day, and I skipped the bike. 4 years old, 5 years old, and we're having breakfast. She goes, "Daddy, did you ride your bicycle today?" I said, "No, honey, I was tired. I slept in." "Why?" "You're not as happy."
Interesting.
5 years old, the kid's picking that up. I'm like, wow, okay. So I have certain rules, certain things that I have to do that people think are weird. I had a deadline for a book, and I'd done all the research the very first month and then ignored it for 10 and a half months because ADHD, and had 2 weeks left. And the publisher calls me. She's like, "So," my editor calls me. She's like, I think this Random House or Palgrave or something. She's like, "Hey, how we doing?" I'm like, good, yeah. Hadn't written shit. And I hung up the phone, and I went to the United Airlines website, booked a round trip ticket to Tokyo that left the next morning. I brought my laptop, a sweatshirt, my power cord, and headphones, and wrote chapters 1 through 5 on the flight to Tokyo. Landed in Tokyo, went to the lounge, had a coffee, had a piece of sushi, took a shower, got back on the same plane, same seat 2 hours later, and wrote chapters 6 through 10. Landed with a book. It became a bestseller. The joke was, when I landed, I actually got held for 5 hours by DHS, Homeland Security, because I never actually cleared immigration. And they wound up calling my editor at home at 7 at night saying, "We're trying to verify, is this guy writing a book for your company?" And she's like, "Yeah, he is. It's fine." And so she goes, "Can I speak to him?" They're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Hi." She's like, "So when you said you were done."
That is amazing.
But yeah, so but and those kind of things, everyone's like, "Oh my God, you spent $5,000 to go nowhere." I'm like, "No, I spent $5,000 to have 28 hours in a cage
Yeah.
to write my book, and I did it."
Interesting. Right. Do you take medication at all, or is it because my understanding is that focus can also be found through medication. So I take medication for other things, for anxiety. And when I was starting to discuss it, part of the conflict is that some of the medication that I already take actually supposedly is supposed to help ADHD. But if I up that medication, I get way too wired.
Yep.
And I obviously don't want to get wired, but so it's a different balance of what to do.
So I'm not anti-med, right? I have a prescription for Concerta. The thing is, if I take it, maybe I take it once a week, once every 2 weeks, twice a week, whatever, but not every day. My prescription usually lasts me like 4 months or something, a month prescription. And what I've learned is that I take it on days. My assistant actually has something on my calendar. She'll put something on my calendar called Med Day. And if I see Med Day the night before when I'm looking at my calendar, it means that I have to take my medication the next morning because she's scheduled like 4 or 5 meetings. And I can't do, no matter how much exercise I do, I can't handle 4 or 5 meetings in a day without medication. But the thing about for me, I have to take it I can't take it any later than 4 a.m. or I don't sleep that night. So sometimes I'll get up at like 3 a.m., pop the pill, go back to sleep for an hour, knowing that in an hour, the amphetamine will have woken me up. But on the flip side, ADHD meds are incredible, but you're right. There's a lot of shit you can't take with them. I went on Ozempic probably a year before everyone else because I had a doctor who had access to the trials, and I went on it. And not only did it not do anything, but it stopped my ADHD meds from working. Turns out the two completely conflict with each other. So I can take Ozempic and be spacey, or I can be totally focused and be fat. So yeah, it's like I joke that I joke that's why, right? I joke that's why I could never do cocaine. I'd be the only cokehead in the world with a weight problem. It's like, just so yeah. I mean, you have to be aware of that. So I take it maybe once. And the thing is, I don't want to be on speed every day, right? That medication is essentially speed. And it's funny because I exercise so much. I went to my doctor at a full physical a couple months ago, and he goes, look, I can tell you to lose 20 pounds, 25 pounds. He goes, and you should. He goes, but I also know how much you exercise, and your resting heart rate's 52. Wow. He goes, I'm not concerned. He goes, your blood pressure and your cholesterol are slightly elevated, nothing terrible. You're on medication because that's genetic. Both your parents have the same thing. He goes, if you lost 25 pounds, would your blood pressure drop? He goes, probably. But he goes, you're in great physical shape. Mm-hmm. He goes, you're in great shape. You want to lose 25 pounds to look better? I'm like, duh. He goes, okay, then work at it. I'm like, oh, okay. I thought you were going to like give me a magic. No.
Right. Try that. Right.
Kind of a bummer. Thanks for that. Get my hopes up. So, look, I've sort of made peace with the fact that I'm always going to be 20 over. I'll always be chasing those last 20, right? I still do. I've done 2 Ironman for Christ's sake.
Right. Like your body. I mean, this is a separate thought, but your body is your body is your body. Like
exactly. I cycle almost every day. I box 3 or 4 times a week. I love boxing. I'm like stronger than you could ever. I don't look strong, which one day is going to come in very handy if I get mugged. I just don't look strong, right? But I am. I'm incredibly muscular. It's just kind of hidden. So yeah, I'm cool with that. And again, making peace with that is similar to making peace with like the fact that I am ADHD and the fact that my brain does work differently. And again, once you stop giving a fuck about what other people think, life gets so much easier. I have 2 quotes that I use all the time for that. One is, I refer you to the reply given in Arkell versus Prestram, which is a lawsuit back in the 60s where the reply from the guy being sued was fuck off. And he actually wound up winning the case. So I love saying that because it's nicer than having to say fuck off.
Nice.
Second one, when someone's really pissing me off, is I look at them and I go, yeah, so here's the thing. Off is the direction in which I need you to fuck. That one tends to work really well. You use that sparingly, but that one tends to work well too.
That's a very good one. I usually am like, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I was rolling my eyes. What did you say? That's my favorite.
What was the movie? I think it was Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray goes, the insurance guy goes, what are you doing for dinner? And he goes, something else.
Oh God, right. Nice. Exactly. No, I do agree with you around the who gives a fuck. Although I don't think that has anything to do with my ADHD. I think that has to do with my age and just life, but I'm with you. I think it's a blessing too. As soon as you stop needing to prove anything to anybody other than yourself and understanding that that's the case, life changes dramatically.
These motherfuckers ain't paying my mortgage.
Exactly. And if there are people around you that are not also on your page, they are weighting you down.
I had a skydiver. There's an older skydiver who I'm friends with. And you want to listen to older skydivers. If they're older and they're still skydiving, that means they've been smart enough not to die. And so you want to listen to them. And one of the ones I was complaining once about how my friends who don't skydive never understand why I go up every weekend and jump. My friends who do jump always don't understand why I want to come home on the like a Saturday night instead of camp out in a crappy tent. I want to come home and have like a shower and hot water and real food. And I explained, and I was saying this. I'm like, yeah, I just he goes. He said something brilliant. He said this to me in 2006, and I've been repeating it daily. It's my mantra. If you can't change the people around you, change the people around you.
Very, very wise.
It's wonderful.
It is a very, very wise statement. And I wish that it was the kind of thing that you learned when you were 20.
Amen. I wish there's a lot of shit I learned. But you know what? I also don't, because to get there, to get where I am now, you had to go through that shit. So everyone's like, oh, if you could change, I'm like, no. Like, a lot of it sucked, but a lot of it was awesome. But the part that sucked got me here, and I think I'm doing well. I have a dog over here who's about 3 years old who thinks I'm doing okay. So, and my daughter thinks I'm doing okay. So I'll take this as a win.
Yeah, so you've done it right. Actually, that's a good one because it brings me to my next question. If your kid was neurodiverse, like what are the 3 things that you would, as a parent, want to like focus in on or try to help with, support with? Because like I have this conversation with my mom a lot. You know, in the 70s, like I wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia until I didn't learn how to read until the 4th grade. It took me a month. I am an avid reader now. I have a very, very good vocabulary, but it took a long time initially to get there. And I have this conversation with my mom. She's always been very conscious around her education. She had a public school education in Alabama, but they learned Latin, like very different type of requirement.
Right.
And she was very committed to making sure that I was well educated, but she didn't know a lot and she could not relate because she doesn't have dyslexia. So some of my friends come to me with specifically around dyslexia about what to do or what would have helped me or what did help me growing up. And I'm curious for you as a parent, you know, what are like real game changers to support your kid?
So my kid is ADHD. She hasn't been tested yet, but I mean, I see it. I see the things in her that you know, even my parents say it's like watching a carbon copy of you when you were a kid. And I'm fine with that. I think it's great. I think
we've done quite well. I think that's going to be
one of the things I know. It's and my parents silently laugh when they see us together. Like, yeah, we're going to enjoy watching it. You know, like they love it. They love when she drives me crazy, and they're like, yep, good,
nice.
Took long enough, you know. But the I think for me, the goal is to teach her that everyone is different, and that doesn't mean that anyone is less than anyone else. People think, act, learn, read, play in different ways. And the goal is to find the best way that you do it and then find the best way in other people that they do it and interact. And Jessa has, had some social anxiety issues, and as did I. But the difference was I dealt with them by acting out, by, talking to everyone. Jessa got very quiet for quite some time. And I mean, who could blame the kid? It's a COVID kid, right? She started kindergarten and then halfway through everything got shut down. First grade and everything got shut down. So
also just childhood.
Exactly, in New York City, right? So one of the things I've been teaching her is to understand that, just because someone doesn't necessarily want to play with you or is talking to someone else doesn't mean they don't like you, right? Stop looking at the moment as right now as is everything. I've tried to teach my daughter that her brain will work differently, but that's a good thing, right? And she doesn't need her brain to work just like everyone else's because that'd be boring. She wants her brain to work differently because that allows her to think differently and act differently and be different. And those are the best kind. And you don't see it now, but that's actually the best way to be. So I've been working on that with her. And I've also been teaching her to just laugh at everything and just find the humor in everything, no matter how weird it might be. They had a lockdown a couple of days ago at the school. There was a shooting about 2 blocks away. It didn't affect the school, but, out of caution, they locked them down and was right at dismissal. So they had, instead of having the kids leave the school and meet their parents, they had the parents go in one by one and get the kids. So I went in and got her. She was free. She was crying. And she goes, "Are we in danger?" I go, "Jessa, here's how I know we're not in danger." And I said, this is coming from someone who grew up in New York City. I said, the guy who first of all, they caught him. But you know how they caught him? She goes, how? Because after he tried to shoot someone, you know how he got away? How? He took a city bike. Think about it. He's like, "I'm going to shoot you." And then he has to tap his phone to get his getaway bike. How can you take that seriously, God? You got to laugh. She cracked up. So, you got to have a sense of humor. Life's too short, and we live in too tumultuous of a time not to find shit funny. You just have to.
Okay, like in terms of tools, like what do you study tools or that kind of thing? Like how do you support her or how will you support her in that way?
So I think a lot of what I try to get her to understand is that just because you don't like something doesn't necessarily mean you get not to do it, right? I know that math's not your favorite thing, so let's work in it together. Let's find a way to do it. I hated math. She's actually better at it than I am, and I don't know what the hell they're teaching. The kind of math they're teaching today is just mind-blowing. It was scary. Like ChatGPT has helped me learn it. But for her, I try to arrange it in ways that I know that work for me, like word problems. I loved word problems because they were readable. I could understand them as opposed to numbers, which were just confusing. So how do we figure this out? Okay. And so I try to make it in a way, she's doing percentages and things like that. All right, Jesse, if Waffle pooped 3 times yesterday, right? And one of those times was on the carpet, but 2 of those times were on his pad. What's the, and so she thinks about it in real time. 1, 2, okay. So for me, I'm trying not to approach it where math or anything that she doesn't want to do is the enemy. I'm trying to approach it as a way to get her to understand that it's common ground, because I think that was what happened to me. Was I've always seen math as the enemy because I was just always terrible at it. Right? So if I can figure out a better way to do it and understand how to make it work to my advantage, there's a benefit there. So I'm trying to do that with her.
I do that too. I try not to like put an emotion attached to anything that I had that was difficult for me growing up. The other thing is that things that I'm sure you have the same is that things that was terrible math student. I almost didn't graduate high school because I had to go to the regents exam, which was the day after prom, just to sign my name. He literally said to me, I can't pass you unless you do this. And I was like, but I'm not going to pass you. He was like, it doesn't matter. I need to show, because I was constantly making an effort.
Yep.
And he was like, I need to show that you're an effort. I am amazing at budgeting because I am amazing at spatial relationship.
Yep, exactly.
Belle is my friend.
Here, this much fits there, this much fits there. I get it. I totally get it.
I can pack on like nobody else. Right.
Spatially seeing things, I get it. Yeah.
But if you tell me some kind of mathematical situation, it doesn't happen. It's a different thing. It's a different side of the brain. And it's, I think, also attached to talent. Like, I think that's attached to the magic, I think, that you speak of like the superpower. This is where you let it go, right?
100%. And I'll take it a step further is that, in school, it was very regimented. We weren't allowed to be that creative. Even though we were at a creative arts school, we weren't allowed to be as creative as we wanted to be in other ways.
Right.
And once I got into the real world and was able to start creating things that didn't have those restrictions or constrictions on them, right? This most recent company I started, it's been 3 weeks. I have over 20,000 users and just signed my first major partnership this morning because I got bored. I had no intention of starting it, right? But when you're not constrained by we should first implement a budget and see if we can do this and then run some, I'm just going to start it. What's the worst going to happen? It doesn't work, I'll go do something else. But you don't get taught that, and that's sort of what I love about, I think that's one of the reasons I love skydiving as much, is because you're never as free. Like, to be free to start a company, if it fails, whatever, that's great, but you still have options. I can start it and then shut it down. I can start it and maybe get acquired. Everything in life tends to boil down to a whole bunch of options, 99.9% of which you don't really need. When I jump out of the plane, and I have over 500 jumps, when I jump out of a plane, my entire existence, literally my existence, I'm not being like dramatic, my existence boils down to two options. Am I going to open my parachute, or am I not going to open my parachute? Every single jump. And yes, I have a device that should, in theory, open my reserve if I get knocked out or whatever. But in theory, my logic says every time I step out of the plane, I can't go back into the plane. I can't skydive up. So I'm fighting gravity at that point. And despite the great song, I can't defy gravity. So my option is very simple. It's either open my parachute and live, or don't open my parachute and die. And I've never in my life felt that level of freedom other than skydiving. And I think that everyone should find a way to get that level of freedom. It doesn't have to be skydiving, Carole. I'm not taking you, even though I've wanted to for years. Don't worry.
I know, and I love you so much for wanting to take me, and it will never happen.
It's funny. Everyone's, I don't understand how you could skydive. The thing that gets me, I'll be sitting watching Instagram reels with my daughter, with Jessa, and if we come across a reel of someone cave diving, where they have to crawl through a cave like this close to the stomach and it's this water, I physically get ill. That scares me more. I'll jump out of a plane any day. That physically scares me. The concept of this millions of pounds of mountain just falling in, oh God. Ugh.
What was the moment that you decided to try skydiving the first? Like, how did you start it? Because it's a huge piece of your life now.
Yeah, classic ADHD fashion. I was running a PR firm back in 2000. And we were a .com startup, and there were tons of .com PR startup firms, and I wanted to differentiate ourselves. And I was we should take a bunch of reporters to dinner. We should have a party. Fuck it, let's take them skydiving. You've been? No, but I'll go. I mean, if it gets us press. And it got us, we took 200 people, or 175 people skydiving, about 100 reporters. We got covered in the New York Times, Silicon Valley Reporter, Forbes, you name it, we were in it, and increased our revenues like 4 times that year. And
wow,
174 people that day jumped out of a plane and crossed it off their bucket list. I showed up the following week back at the drop zone and started getting my license. A couple of years later, but wound up getting my license.
That's wild.
It's that joke that I think Dennis Leary made the joke. You put 100 people in a room and with a bag of cocaine, and 99 don't come out of them either dead or like, okay, that was fun. Then there's one guy who's like, I need more cocaine.
Right.
That was pretty much me. Thank God it was skydiving, but it's the general premise that it is because for the first time in my life, I did that jump and I landed and I was physically high. I was
Wow.
physically high. I had all the dopamine, all the serotonin, all the adrenaline running through my veins at a level I had never in my life felt before. I'd never taken meds, I'd never done drugs, nothing.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm like, this must be what normal people feel like. Holy shit, this is amazing. And now it's funny, I've had to, again, you have to learn. When I go up to the drop zone by myself, I've learned to take a cup of water, and I put the cup of water when I leave the drop zone. I put the cup of water on my dashboard. And the goal is to drive home carefully enough to not spill the cup of water. Because the first few times after skydiving, I'd get in the car and twice in a row got busted for speeding.
Wow.
Because I was so wired for skydiving. I'm like doing 85 on a country road, not even noticing. I'm just like, ah! I'm like, all right, how do we fix this problem? Because so that's when I started bringing my laptop to the drop zone, and I'd spend a couple hours working, try to get some of it out of my system, then go home. You got to know yourself. It is whatever your thing is, you have to know yourself. If you don't know yourself, that's when you're going to run into trouble.
That's great. That's a great tip too. I mean, not to go skydiving, but find your skydiving.
I get it. You're not going to go skydiving with me.
Exactly. I have another, it's a little bit of a segue, but I personally believe that change is an inevitable thing. And it's the one thing that most people are terrified of. And certainly for you, as such an accomplished entrepreneur, you've changed constantly. Your resume itself, the businesses themselves have changed. The topics, although there is a through line to them, are also quite different, that you've done huge deep dives into. So what is your perspective on change? I mean, are you afraid of it? Do you get bored? Is that a piece of it? Tell me a little more about that.
That's a great question. I do get bored very easily. Your comfort zone is a great place, but nothing ever grows there. Okay. And if you're in your comfort zone, that's complacency. Complacency leads to stagnation. Stagnation leads to failure. Right. So for me, I think the boredom is actually a good thing because it keeps me wanting to move forward. It keeps me wanting to try new things. You know who fears change the most? I've discovered over my past 25 years as an entrepreneur, haters. Haters fear change. If you don't have haters, you're not doing enough to change the status quo, right? And I've learned that.
It's a great perspective, especially in this culture kind of.
Totally. I mean, I've had, and look, that's not to say I haven't have moments where it's a complete asshole and deserve to be called out for it, but I remember there have been times when where everyone's piling on and about one thing or another, and then someone will actually say, but he's right, or something like that, and it just takes that one. I'm like, yeah, I know. And the problem with ADHD is that you tend to have tremendous imposter syndrome, and so I'll give a keynote, and there'll be 5,000 people in the audience, and 4,999 of them will stand up and give me a standing ovation when I'm done. One guy won't, and that's the guy I'll notice, right? And in my head, everything's terrible. Now, for all I know, this guy's a paraplegic and he can't stand up, but in my head, he hated it. Everyone else hated it, regardless of the fact that 4,990 people are standing right in front of me cheering. And that's something I've had to work on for years and years and years. And change, I think, is healthy in that relationship because change allows you to start anew and allows you to sort of reset and say, okay, I did that. Let's see if I could do this again to prove to myself that I'm not as fake as I think I am. The greatest gift I ever got was from my therapist. And I've had the same therapist now since going on 20 years next year. And the one thing I've worked so hard with him on was internalizing my successes. Every time I started to have some success back in when I sold my first agency in 2001 and moving forward with the other companies and eventually I'd get on TV, whatever. Every time I have success, think about it and be like, if only those kids from junior high could see me now, right? And see how much I've done. I'd show them all. And through years of therapy, one day my therapist was like, why are you giving it to them? Why aren't you enjoying? Why are you letting them have your success? If they're still in your head, and that was the biggest wake up call ever, to actually enjoy what I've done. They're not thinking about me. And every once in a while, I'll get an email from someone who found me on Facebook or Instagram, whatever. I don't remember me. We were in junior high together. I always knew you were going to go far. The fuck you did. You had people beat me up. You literally had told your boyfriend to beat me up because I was me.
Right.
And so life's too damn short, right? Why let people live in your head rent free? And that's just a huge thing. And a lot of people have that. And I had it. I still have it in a way, but you get a little better every day.
So I want to go to your entrepreneurial side because I want, there's a lot of people now There's a lot of small businesses. There's a lot of people now that are really like, with social media, especially with COVID, that are really trying to create small businesses for themselves or basically be entrepreneurs as a multi-passionate entrepreneur. Like, what are some of the things that you would advise if they are neurodiverse to do this? I mean, I understand that entrepreneurship and neurodiversity kind of go hand in hand,
Yeah.
but like the largesse, as you said, of starting something, like the first step for a lot of times is the hardest thing, because you have to get the haters out of your head. So once the haters are out of your head, like what are some of the things that you would recommend to, entrepreneurs who are wanting to do something, they're wanting to change their universe, but are really like not able to kind of figure it out or focus in, et cetera?
I've always been of the opinion that figure out what you use on a daily basis that annoys you and then make a better version of it. And that's always a great way to start. But that being said, entrepreneurship is essentially jumping off a cliff and trying to build a parachute before you hit the ground. You're going to fail. I will never, ever, ever hire anyone who hasn't failed, because then I don't believe they've learned anything. I want you to fail. I've started 4 companies, sold 3, and I failed millions of times in between that. And, I fail every day. And that's the goal. The goal is to learn something and not, my first job was in America Online. I worked in the newsroom, and we had Steve Case basically told us one basic rule: do something. If it works, do it again. If it doesn't work, don't do it again.
Great simple advice.
Yeah, that's how I learned. And so I'm a believer that you should, the biggest risk, it's been said, is not taking one, right? And the roadside, the highway of life is littered on the side of the road with ideas that failed, not because they failed, but because the people were too afraid to try them. And that's my biggest fear, is not failure, but having not done something and watching it succeed somehow, some other way, right? What's the worst? If the worst thing that can happen doesn't end up with you in jail, homeless, or in an international incident, why not just try it?
I want an international incident.
Me too.
Like, that is actually on my bucket list.
I almost had one. My ADHD, I was flying to Galapagos, somewhere, Buenos Aires, somewhere. And I stopped off in Panama, and I had like 3 hours to go in the airport in Panama. And so I jumped off the plane singing at like 7 a.m, singing Panama, and was met by like 4 very angry military policemen with AKs. And that's when I learned that Panama police have absolutely no sense of humor. But yeah, I think that
I feel like that didn't need to be an experiment.
Of course I'm going to, and I didn't think, I was like, yeah, it'll be funny. No, it wasn't. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing stopping you from being an entrepreneur is you. I get it that it's scary. I get not everyone can just up and quit their job, and you don't have to. There used to be this culture of like, hustle, 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 sleep 3 hours a night, fucking you sleep when you're dead. That's bullshit. We're teaching people how to kill themselves. Don't do that. Focus on yourself first. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. And if you have an hour a day, work on something.
Right.
Work really hard on it for that hour a day, but don't kill yourself to do it.
I feel like the culture has taught that a little bit, but it's also like, I feel like the Gen X are like, we've done the footwork for like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, and it doesn't work.
Nope.
Is there a point where you realize that was a tactic?
Yeah, back in like 2001, I met this Navy SEAL. He teaches a boot camp class in Central Park. He's since passed away, but a wonderful man, became a really close friend. And I would take his class, and he would always talk about his mantras were, the only easy day is yesterday, and get there and get it done. But what he'd talk about, he's like, yeah, the only way you can perform and be an operator at your best is if you're taking care of yourself. He goes, I don't want to see some guy who's been up for 48 hours having my 6 when we're in a firefight. He goes, I want to know that this guy's taking care of it. And that was a huge lesson to me, because I used to be a night owl. I took one class of his where you had to be in Central Park by 3:45 in the morning. It was like a 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. class. And it beat I remember the first day we worked upper body, second day we worked lower body. He was running like 5 miles each day. I was so exhausted by the third day. I got up to try to take a shower. I couldn't lift the shampoo bottle. Like my arms were, I squirted the shampoo on the wall, and I had to rub my head into the wall. I remember that. But I took the class like 11 times, and it wound up being one of the best things I ever did, because I learned that you have to put yourself first. You have to put on your own oxygen mask first. You have to take care of yourself first. So, with that, I started getting a good night's sleep, and I'm up now this morning I was up at 3 a.m. I was just up. And, but on the flip side, I'm going to go to sleep at 8. I go to sleep at 8 o'clock. Oh, what are you, a farmer? No, I love going to sleep at 8 o'clock. My daughter goes to sleep at 8. I'm out by 8:30. And then when I'm up at 3:30 and I get on the bike, those 2 hours are mine. I own the world. Greatest thing. And the number one fallacy that entrepreneurs think, oh, they have to go to the parties, they have to go to the open bar parties, they have to go to the networking events. You know how many times I've ever gotten business from an open bar party and networking event? Absolutely zero. You know where I've gotten the most business? 5:30 a.m. waiting for the doors to open at Equinox, because you know who else is there at 5:30 a.m.? Other CEOs.
Right.
Right? The only people you can meet at the open bar parties are people that might be able to get you to someone who can 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 make a decision. The decision makers are at the door waiting for Equinox to open at 5:30 because that's what they do.
Yep.
Game changer once I learned that.
Yeah. That's so true. Right. Know that that's what the action of what you're doing is in fact who you are and how you're doing it. Yeah. No, I that's taken me a while to get that, not the action part, but the actual being able to go to bed, to get up, and understanding how valuable it is. It's huge. So how do you stay organized? Like, like you've got to stay organized. Like, do you have I know you use Google Calendars. Do you have like software that you use? I know you're very tech savvy. Like, what are some of the tools that you use that you love that help you?
I definitely use as much automation as possible. So for instance, in my apartment, my HVAC, my lighting, my shades are all automatic. They're all automated. My shades start rising in my bedroom at 3:30 in the morning. Or like 3:15 in the morning. So by 3:30 they're up. My lights start coming on around 3:30 in the morning in a sunrise pattern. So by 4 a.m. they're up, and I wake up naturally. When you wake up to an alarm, your alarm doesn't know your circadian rhythm, so your alarm might wake you up in the middle of a deep REM, which is why sometimes it's really hard to get up. If you wake up to light, your body notices the light when it's ready to come out of that deep REM, and so I always wake up. So I let the lights wake me up, then I get on the bike. I have 4 basic rules: exercise every day. At least something, right? Even if it's just a walk. It doesn't have to be like massive, just something to get the dopamine. I have organized my closet to the point where it is literally labeled. I have 2 sides to my closet. They say office/travel, and it's t-shirt and jeans, speaking/TV, and it's a button-down shirt, jacket, and jeans. And the reason for that is because all my suits, my vests, my sweaters, my gorgeous clothing, beautiful pieces I've got in Europe, whatever, those are all in my daughter's closet. Because if I had to wake up every morning and look at this ridiculous, what should I wear? Oh my God, that sweater. I remember that sweater. God, Laura gave me that sweater. I wonder how she's doing. I should look her up. It's 3 hours later. I'm naked in the living room on Facebook and I haven't left the house.
Right.
The goal is simplify, right? The 3rd rule is sleep. You got to get it. And the 4th rule is just try to eat. My grandmother, who passed away in 2008, she died at 98. My logic is if she wouldn't have recognized it as food when she was 12, I try not to eat it, right? She would not have known what super extreme nacho flavor was when she was 12 in like Poland or wherever the hell she was, Connecticut or wherever she grew up in, so that's sort of the premise. And when I'm starving, when I think I'm hungry, I constantly employ the worst thing in the world. And I hate that I ever learned it, called the apple test. You know what the apple test is?
No, I do not. What is it?
Next time you go to the kitchen aimlessly and you're looking for food, ask yourself, am I hungry enough to eat an apple? 95% chance you're not. And if you're not, then you're not hungry. You're bored.
Right.
And I hate that. I think only one time in 4 years I've been hungry enough to eat a goddamn apple. It was very annoying. But yeah, I mean, and so far as other tech tools, yeah, I try to thrive in the Google and Apple ecosystems. I take voice notes constantly. Here's a basic rule. Anything you think you're going to remember, you won't. Ever. So write it down. And in my case, I just, press the button, remind me at 7 p.m. to do this, remind me at 4 p.m. It doesn't matter what time it is, as long as I hear it again, where I'm in a place where I can write it down. I have Alexas all over the apartment, so I could set everything up as need be. There are only 3 or 4 people who are on my breakthrough list on my phone. The majority of everything from text to emails to whatever, I don't get notified for unless I actually look at my phone. Only my ex-wife, in case it's something with my daughter, my daughter's school, my parents, my girlfriend, those are the only ones who have access to me that it actually rings through. Because, I don't, if I see it, the reason so many people still text and drive, even though knowing that it could kill them and kill other people, is because when you get a text message ding, you get a hit of dopamine. It's literally addictive, right? So I keep it off. And you have to remember that your phone, you own your phone. It's not the other way around. You control your phone doesn't control you.
Well, tell me what's going on with you. I know you have a whole bunch of stuff, and now 3 weeks in, you have even more stuff. So tell me what's happening.
So I created a company years ago called Help a Reporter Out. And it connected journalists with sources all around the world. And it allowed sources to get free press. It allowed journalists to find sources they needed. It went really well. And it was acquired 3 years after I started it, in a game-changing move for me, which allowed me to get this apartment and make sure my kid goes to college and all that stuff. And then I did a bunch of other stuff for like 14 years. I started a couple other companies, and I wrote some books, and I went on TV a lot, and I speak, and all that stuff. It was fun. Um, the company that bought Harrow, helped we put her out, kind of let it lapse a bit. And I would see it from time to time, and it would bum me out, whatever. But I'm like, hey, can't go home again, sold my baby. It's not mine anymore. And then I found out like a month and a half ago they were shutting it down. And that really sort of bummed me out more than normal. And I sent an email to my mailing list like, hey, raise a glass, pour one out for Harrow. It was great while it lasted. And I did not expect to get over 2,000. That's not an exaggeration. Over 2,000 emails back. Said, you should restart it. I went, I don't want to do that. I really don't. Can't go home again. And then my girlfriend has no idea how close she became to becoming my ex-girlfriend by doing this. She goes, you should change the second letter from help a reporter out to help every reporter out and just call it Hero. And I looked at her, I'm like, because that's too good of a name. And now you put it out in the universe. And if I don't do it, someone else is going to do. God damn you. So it literally launched 3 weeks ago today. We have over 20,000 users, and we just signed a partnership deal with Muckrack to create verified queries and verified media links. It's blown up. We're sold out on advertising for like the next 3 weeks. It's pretty impressive. So it's kind of fun. Fast and Normal is my podcast. It's a book, but it's also my podcast. We have about 350 episodes from 350 different interviews with people who are neurodiverse all across the spectrum, and how they've succeeded, how they use their ADHD and their neurodiversity and their autism and everything as a gift, not a curse. And each episode is 15 minutes only because ADHD, which should tell you something. Tell you how much I like you and how much I respect you, that I stayed an hour and 3 fucking minutes on this podcast.
Well, then I thank you for taking the time and also your focus. It's been a real treat and quite enlightening. So tell me about your latest book.
It's called The Boy with the Faster Brain, and the basic premise is it's autobiographical. It's about Peter, who comes home every day and gets in trouble because he got in trouble at school. And one day his dad says, we're going to have you talk to a feelings doctor. And the feelings doctor, Dr. Lisa, said, hey, your brain goes a little faster than others. Let's figure out ways to make it better and make it useful, and you can drive your brain better. And he becomes like the top student in his class because he understands how to use his faster brain. And the reason I wrote it was because, and it's how we started this conversation, it's a great way to end it. Elementary and junior high school sucked for me. It sucked every single day, and I was miserable, and it was horrible. And what I learned over time was, as I got older, that I was actually gifted, not broken. But it took 30 years of therapy to figure that out. If we can teach kids at 5 years old who are neurodiverse that they are gifted, not broken, they can start appreciating that immediately, as opposed to having to go to therapy for 30 years to get it out.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you like what you heard, please hit subscribe. Also, if you want to keep in touch, go to Insta at About a Blonde or Facebook at About a Blonde Official. Also, you can sign up for my mailing list at www.aboutablonde.com. Have a great day. Mwah!